Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. So today we are quilting block number 7. This is a bear's claw block. Very, very fun. Lots of half square triangles. So let's get started piecing this together. So the first step to the bear's claw block is to piece up a mess of half square triangles, and you've got a couple different sizes, so definitely refer to your pattern and also refer to my other tutorial on how to piece this unit. It's very simple, but you want to be very careful to trim them down to the right size so they're perfect for piecing. Okay. So the next step is to take the smaller size of half square triangles and piece them together in sets of 4. And we have 2 different arrangements. We have them so that the straight line, long edge, is against the back side, here you can see, and pointing in the other direction. And I know this might be a kind of a weird thing to focus on, but this actually really does matter. The directional nature of these half square triangles really plays a big role. And on the ones that are facing this way, I also pieced on an extra background square on the end of that too. So here's what you do. You're going to piece both of those sets 4 times, and that's going to create 4 of your bear's claw blocks. So here we go. What you're going to do is first attach the shorter row, and how I remember how this goes, because it's easy to flip these around the opposite way, and you can see how you're getting a very different effect here at the tip of the corner. So what you want to remember is that coming up from that edge, that left edge of the square, you're going into a long edge of the half square triangle, not a point. So try and keep that in mind, and definitely refer to the diagrams in the pattern. So you piece this one on first, just right sides together, and stitch that with a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip it open, press that seam allowance nice and open and flat, and then you'll do the same thing for this side. Just flip that over, stitch along that edge, press the seam allowances open, and you want to make sure that that corner and that seam line matches up really nicely. And here's what it looks like whenever you piece up that little 1/4 of the block. So next we're going to take 4 of these and combine them together to create the block center. So here is the center of our block. We have our 4 bear's claws, and we have 4 rectangles of background fabric and a scrappy cornerstone that goes right in the middle. And I've already pieced this together into rows. I've done these 2 already. So you basically just make sure that you've got your bear's claw oriented the right way. Flip over that piece of sashing fabric that goes in the middle. Flip up on that and then pin it to the next one, making sure that those bear's claws are in the right arrangement. So there we go. Now I'm going to take this to the machine and stitch this together so I have that final row. And then we're going to take, and actually I can go on ahead and get this side prepped up. You can see how I've already stitched those together, and that middle part where I've got sashing, cornerstone sashing. So now I can take this and just flip it over and match those seams. That's all I've got to do. And then I can take this and stitch it at the same time. So there we go, all prepped up, ready to go. Let's take this to the machine. Now I am sewing on an Eversewn Sparrow 20, and you can learn more about this machine at leahday.com/sew20. And I have a regular straight stitch with my needle in the center position, and I've lowered my stitch length to 1.5 millimeters just to create a nice secure stitch. I want it to be nice and tight. And because I do that, I feel like I can press my seam allowances open. And that's one of those things that a lot of quilters ask me about, whether to press seam allowances open or to one side. I like them pressed open. Okay, so you have 2 choices as to which side that you stitch facing up. I like to have the side with seam allowance facing up so I can make sure that those seam allowances stay open and flat. So here we go, just making sure that that's lined up along that right edge and along the top edge, just exactly right. And then slide it underneath the foot and right up against the needle, and then begin stitching. And that clip was just holding those pieces in place. It wasn't actually set up there accurately, so I always take that out and then work to match up the fabrics just exactly right. And what's nice is I'm not having to really match any seams. I just want to make sure that both the sashing and the block end up coming out the same length, meaning that that corner ends up coming out just exactly in the same place. There we go. And I love chain piecing. Chain piecing keeps your machine in stitching mode. What that means is you basically grab your next set of pieces. I'm going to flip it over so I have the seam allowance, more seam allowance I should say, on top. There we go. And I like this because I stay in stitching mode. I don't have long thread tails. I can just take this set of pieces, lift the foot slightly, push those pieces right up against the needle, and begin stitching. And I'm just making sure that the fabrics stay nicely locked together and they stay in line with that edge of the patchwork foot. So now I'm going to take a look at the seam that I've got right in the center and just make sure that's stacked up nicely together. I put some fingertip pressure on that. As I guide it through, I'm just pressing really firmly down with my index finger right there. And now I'm going to do the same thing. Kind of just generally clip that in place. You could definitely pin this if you really wanted it to match absolutely perfectly. But I'm trusting my cutting and my fabric preparation. I starch and I pre-wash and starch my fabric before cutting it. And I trust that to make my fabric nice and stiff and stable so it doesn't go wobbly, bobbly, or loosey-goosey on me as I piece. And that means it's so much easier to match these seam lines. There we go. And again, I'm just wanting to make sure that that ends out in the same place, just like so. Okay, and looks like I need one more seam to stitch between these two. So just clip that off, flip it around, make sure I'm not going to stitch through anything I'm not supposed to. Here we go. Yeah, and I can sew that seam, that remaining seam here between the bear's claw block and the cornerstone, the sashing on that opposite side. So here we go. Just lining up those corners nicely. Now lift the foot, slide it right up against the needle, begin stitching. And kind of like when I get the needle in it, and it's always needle down, so that way your fabric's not going to wobble and you're not going to end up with a very big stitch. So once I get a needle in it, that's when I can take a look at those fabrics and make sure that they're lining up just exactly right. So there we go. We've got the two, basically kind of two halves of our bear claw block complete. And it looks like I need to, this is a scrap charger. This is how I keep my machine in stitching mode. It lifts the foot slightly, which is great for piecing, so I can slide the next set of pieces right underneath. And it's just like chain piecing. It keeps it from kind of gagging with those long thread tails. It also wastes less bobbin thread. And I don't know about you, but I don't really like winding bobbins. So that saves some time too. Okay, you can see here I am finger pressing the seam allowance open. This is how I get all of those seams nice and flat. I use my fingernail. You can hear it. I'm dragging it over the fabric just to flatten out those seams perfectly. I don't want to take the tip of my iron and try and dig at this. It really doesn't work well. And then give this a quick press, and then we can stitch that side of the block to this opposite side. So here are the two halves of that center bear's claw block, and I'm just going to flip over these pieces, line them up with that center cornerstone, and piece this together just the exact same way. And you might want to go on ahead as you're piecing this together to also attach the background strip to the other side of this piece as well. And you could see I already had one background strip attached to the opposite side. And you know, it's just a little bit time saving, because sometimes, you know, whenever you're piecing something in kind of rows, you don't have to stop and press between that, and that can save you a little time. I once found when I was sewing garments professionally that the more times I had to get up and move and go to my iron, the more time I lost, because I would often get distracted and, you know, wander away from my machine for a little while and that kind of thing. So it was just more efficient to try and find all the seams I could stitch before I had to stop. So here's what I mean by that. I've just stitched that seam right next to the center sashing. Here we go. You can see what that looks like. And then I can flip this around. Actually, I'll just leave it right like here. Grab this wide strip of border fabric, flip that over, and that's going to get stitched to this edge. But remember what I said about seam allowance? I like the seam allowance to be face up if I have a choice. You know, if there's one piece that has seam allowance and another piece does not, then I like to have the piece that has seam allowance facing up, just so I can make sure that those seams are staying nice and open and flat. So here we go. I'm just making sure that this is lining up nicely. Whenever, like I said, whenever I get a needle in it, I just go all the way down to the end. Make sure that those ends are lining up and just kind of hang on to that as I piece through those layers. And I'm also making sure that the edges of the fabric stay in nice alignment. I know black is a hard background fabric. It's hard to see, and especially with black thread, you know, it is kind of difficult. But you just need to keep an eye on that. Sometimes lift up on the fabric and make sure that they're not slipping apart. You know, it's easy for one piece to kind of tuck down underneath the top piece, and then it's not accurate. So just take your time with that. Go on ahead and piece your center bear claw block and the border around it, and then we'll work on the second border. That's going to be more half square triangles going around. So here's what the block should look like at this stage. I pieced my 4 bear's claw blocks together with the sashing and the cornerstone in the center, and then I already had this strip of this first border already attached, and I attached the second strip and then a strip to the bottom and the top. And so at this stage, you could even measure what your block and double check that it's measuring the right size, because, you know, of course, there's a lot of little pieces in here and seam allowances, so that's a really, really good idea. And just refer to your pattern so that way you're sure that the center block is going to fit with your borders. And you can see here I've already pieced these scrappy half square triangles together to form these 2 beautiful borders. So those are going to go on the 2 sides and then on the top and bottom. Now, the one thing about this, I got a little picky about the border. I liked it when the triangles kind of came all the way to one corner and then they changed direction as they turned that corner, you know, with each strip. And so for the longer strips, you'll notice that there's one triangle that is turned differently from the rest. And just make a note of that. This is me just being a little geeky, I'll be completely honest, but I just really like the way that this turned out. So I know it's a tiny thing, but it's one of those things that I just really enjoy doing in patchwork, and it made me happy to see. So I hope that you enjoy making this beautiful bear's claw block, and I'll add one more extra border to that outer edge, and this is what it's going to look like when it's all put together. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning how to piece this beautiful bear's claw block with me and you're excited about giving it a try. You know, we are officially more than halfway done with our friendship quilt, but that does not mean that the pottery is over or that you cannot join in the fun right now. All of the tutorials and patterns will remain available online forever, so you can join in anytime and piece and quilt a crib, throw, twin, queen, or king-sized beautiful scrappy sampler quilt. Come and find all of the patterns and all of the information you need to get started at leahday.com/friendship. Until next time, let's go quilt.